Well, Tom, I think you are becoming a rock star. Huh?
No, Nayan.
Keep working, Tom. Good afternoon, welcome. A year ago or so, I told Tom Friedman, I fully understood that given his stand, his very high stand, as the New York Times foreign affairs columnist, he would be writing so frequently and sometimes almost only about what seemed to be the chief American foreign policy issue, the war in Iraq. I was complaining. But I also told him that I, like many others, truly regretted that he had stopped being the keen observer of globalization that he used to be. I said, Tom, it's sad that your writings on globalization have become one more in the long list of collateral damages caused by the war. He stopped me and said, hey, Ernesto, not so fast. I am planning and in fact working already on a new book on globalization. How about that? Obviously, he put me on the defensive. But after a few seconds of hesitation, I decided to go on the offensive again and said, well, if that's the case, Tom, you must promise that as soon as the book is published, you come and present it to our university. In consistency with his proverbial bonhomie, Tom said, that's a deal. Last fall, Nayan Chanda, our Yale Global editor, raise your hand, Nayan, who is also an old friend of Tom, and Nayan and I had the privilege of having a long conversation with Tom Friedman at our center, in which Tom graciously gave us some advanced presentation of the ideas that he was writing in his new book, and reiterated his commitment to come and present the book as soon as it would be published. Well, today, ladies and gentlemen, Tom Friedman is honoring his word again. And he is here to tell us why the earth is becoming flat, and what are the consequences for countries like mine, Mexico, but certainly the challenges that this is also posing for countries as powerful as the United States of America. So Tom, welcome again, and thanks for being here.
Ernesto, thank you very much. It's a treat to be here. I've been on the road the last few days presenting the book, and of all the events I've been doing, this is truly the one I've looked forward to most. I don't think the Yale community appreciates the incredible gem that it has here in the Globalization Center that Nayan Chanda and Ernesto Zedillo have put together. The Yale Global website has been a constant source of insight and information for me. So there's really nowhere more that I would like to begin talking about this book than at an event hosted by Ernesto and Nayan. And my daughter also goes to school here. So what I thought I would do in the next just sort of 30 minutes is try to just give you this is a long book, 488 pages, so try to just give you the core thesis. And if you all are uncomfortable over there, there's sort of room on the stage, and you won't bother me if you sit up there. So I don't want anyone who wants to be in to be out. I'm actually going to take off my jacket if you don't mind. you know, Ernesto's story about us having this conversation probably about 14 months ago is very accurate. And to really understand what this book is about, you have to understand where it came from. As readers of my column know, I became the foreign affairs columnist in 1995, and my interests in that column really oscillated between kind of Lexus issues of technology and finance and globalization, and olive tree issues of conflict and traditional geopolitics. And I was in that kind of oscillation mode. I would go from one theme to the other, right up till September 11th, 2001, at which point I really dropped the globalization theme like a stone and really went off and covered the 9/11 wars. Really from September 11th on, I spent my whole time in the Arab Muslim world, trying to really understand the roots of 9/11 and the impact of our response to it. And I took one trip, I think, during those 3 years to Silicon Valley. I went out to visit a startup company that some friends of mine were involved in. It's something called Google. And I did exactly one column about Google and went back to Kabul, basically, kind of metaphorically. And I realized I'd sort of lost the thread of the globalization story. Anyways, during this 3-year period, I started doing documentaries for the Discovery Channel in coordination with the New York Times. And we did one on the roots of 9/11. We did another on the wall that Israel had built in the West Bank. And last January, that is 14 months ago, January of 2004, we were sitting around with our Discovery team thinking about what to do next. And at the time, of course, the whole question of America's image in the world was a big issue. And I thought, well, maybe we do something around that. And I had this idea that why don't we go to call centers around the world and interview young people who spend their days imitating Americans on what they thought of America. And I thought it could make a very interesting kind of double, perspective. And we were literally budgeting that out, where to go, Philippines, here or there, Costa Rica, Poland, when John Kerry came out with his blast against Benedict Arnold executives who engage in outsourcing. And that immediately exploded the whole issue of outsourcing onto the world stage and on the American stage. Business Week, Fortune, Forbes, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, everyone did series about outsourcing. And so just watching all that unfold in a period of really a couple of weeks, I said, you know what, stop. Why don't we just go to Bangalore, the high-tech capital of India, the Silicon Valley of India, and let's do a documentary on the other side of outsourcing. Can I ask people to turn their cell phones off if you haven't? Just so your cell phones, pacemakers, anything, just turn them off. So, very disturbing. So we had this idea that we would do a documentary on the other side of outsourcing. So off we went on February 15th, 2004 to Bangalore. And we did about 60 hours of interviews in a space of about 10, 11 days. And through the course of these interviews, I basically got sicker and sicker. It wasn't the food. It was a dawning awareness that while I had been sleeping, something really big had happened in this globalization story, and I had totally missed it. It hit me somewhere between the Indian entrepreneur who wanted to do my taxes from Bangalore, and the one who wanted to write my software from Bangalore, and the one who wanted to read my x-rays from Bangalore, and the one who wanted to trace my lost luggage on Delta Airlines from Bangalore, that something had happened. In fact, I wish I could show you just the outtakes from these interviews. I'd be sitting across from Jerry Rao, the head of NASSCOM, the Indian High Tech Association, and he's literally saying, Tom, I can do your taxes, I can do your family's taxes, I can do your wife's family's taxes from here. And with me saying, Jerry, what did I miss? I missed something. How can you be doing this? What did I miss? Well, the last interview we had was with Nandan Nilekani, the head of Infosys, the CEO of Infosys, which is kind of the Microsoft of India. And Nandan's an old friend, we were sitting on the couch outside his office, and before the camera started, he said, Tom, I've got to tell you, the global economic playing field is being leveled. And you Americans, you're not ready. Oh, I wrote that down in my notebook. The global playing field is being leveled. Anyways, we did our interview, and after that got into our Jeep and drove back to our hotel with my Indian driver driving barefoot over the potholed streets of Bangalore, and I just kept rolling over in my head what Nandan had said. The playing field is being leveled. What he's telling me is that the playing field is being flattened. Oh my God. He's telling me the world is flat. And he's citing this as a great advance in human development, that we'd made the world flat. That evening, I got on the phone, I called my wife from Bangalore, and I said, honey, I'm going to write a book called The World is Flat. She thought I had completely lost my mind. But I came home from that trip. I called the publisher of the New York Times, Mr. Salzberger, and I said, Arthur, I have to go on leave immediately because my framework on globalization, which I laid out in Lexus and the Olive Tree, needs updating. And if I don't do that, I'm going to write something really stupid in the New York Times. And so we sat down and we plotted out a plan, and from that day on, beginning basically March 15th of 2004, 12 months ago basically, a little over 12 months ago, I started this book, and I've been doing nothing else since, except writing 2 columns a week. Okay. And it became a complete obsession for me to get my mind around what had happened and to answer that question. Now the book opens, the first chapter is called, appropriately enough, While You Were Sleeping. And the book begins by me noting that Christopher Columbus actually set sail in 1492 looking for a shorter route to India. That's where Columbus was going. He sailed west. He had the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria. He never did find India, but he called the people he met Indians, and we still call them that to this day. And he came home and told his wife, honey, I've accidentally discovered the world is round. I set off for India 512 years later. I knew just which direction I was going. I went east. I had Lufthansa business class and a GPS satellite that popped up in my seat. And I came home and reported to my wife, honey, I've accidentally discovered the world is flat. And what this first chapter is about is all the encounters I had first in India, but then beyond. I went to Dalian, China, the outsourcing capital of Japan now. Tens of thousands of Japanese-speaking Chinese. Get your mind around that in light of the recent headlines out of China, okay? Tens of thousands of Japanese-speaking Chinese managing the bookkeeping and back room now for hundreds of Japanese multinationals and American multinationals formerly based in Tokyo. And then I kept going east. I went to Colorado and needed to make a plane reservation one day, so I called JetBlue, most successful airline in America. I kind of knew what I was doing. I asked them if they flew from Washington to Atlanta. No, they said, had a wonderfully friendly woman on the phone, sounded a little matronly. I said, ma'am, would you mind, could I ask you your name? She said, sure, my name is Betty. I said, Betty, could you tell me, where are you right now? She said, honey, I'm up in my bedroom. I got my slippers on and my bathrobe, and I'm looking out at the most beautiful scene of Salt Lake City because JetBlue has completely outsourced its reservation system to retirees in the Salt Lake City area. So when you call JetBlue for a reservation, you may get Betty or Bob or Susie up in their bedroom or in their kitchen or around the dinner table because they're making your reservation on their home computer. JetBlue was founded by a man named David Neeleman, who's a devout Mormon. who believes families would be held together better if parents were able to work at home, and so he has designed a complete home reservation system. That's who makes your JetBlue reservation. Your phone call is routed automatically to somebody in their bedroom. So I kept moving east, got back home to Washington, read a piece in the Washington Post about McDonald's new pilot project, how when you drive into McDonald's now and you go to the drive-in thing and you press a button and say, I'd like, 3 Big Macs, 6 milkshakes, 18 fries, you're not speaking to the people in that McDonald's. You're speaking to a McDonald's call center in Colorado that's taking down your order and taking your picture. And they flash your picture together with your order back into that McDonald's. McDonald's discovered they saved 30 seconds on each order and drove down their error rate by a significant degree. This is just a beginning program. It's not everywhere. But I kept bumping into these flattening experiences kind of around every corner. So this chapter really ends with a meta-argument, and the meta-argument underlying this book is that there have been 3 great eras of globalization. One I call Globalization 1.0. And I would argue that lasted from about 1492 until around 1800, which is the beginning of global arbitrage, 1820. And that era of globalization really shrunk the world from a size large to a size medium. And that era of globalization was really built around countries globalizing. Spain discovering the New World, Britain colonizing India, Portugal in East Asia. The dynamic agent of globalization in that era was the country. You went global through your country. The second great era of globalization was from the early 1800s till 2000. Yeah, it just ended. And that era of globalization shrunk the world from size medium to size small. And the dynamic agent of change in that era of globalization was not the country, but the company. The multinational, which went global in search of markets and labor. So in Globalization 2.0, you went global through your company. That was the dynamic agent of globalization. While you were sleeping, while I was sleeping, we entered Globalization 3.0 from 2000 to the present. That's why the book is called The World is Flat, A Brief History of the 21st Century. And this era, this Globalization 3.0, is shrinking the world from size small to size tiny and flattening the playing field at the same time. Only what's really new about this era is it's not built around companies globalizing, and it's not built around countries globalizing. The new thing in this era is that the dynamic agent of globalization in this era is the ability of individuals and small groups to globalize. So we've gone from a globalization built around countries to one built around companies to one increasingly built around individuals and small groups. And be advised, it ain't going to be a bunch of white Western individuals who dominated Globalization 1.0 and 2.0. It's going to be individuals of every color of the rainbow who are going to be able to plug and play. So that's really kind of the meta theme of the book. The second chapter, and I'm just going to do the first 3 just to give the kind of core thesis, then we can talk more about it. The second chapter of the book, which really took me the longest time, is called The 10 Days That Flattened the World. And it's about the 10 really days, events, technologies, and companies that came together to actually create this level playing field. And let me go through them for you quickly. The first date is 11/9, 11/9/89. Not 9/11, 11/9. In a wonderful Kabbalistic accident of dates, the Berlin Wall came down on 11/9, November 9th, 1989. And the fall of the Berlin Wall was a huge flattener. I call these the 10 flatteners, because it allowed us to actually see and think of the world as a single flat plane. I would bet Yale didn't even think of having a globalization center before 1989, any more than IBM would have described its business plan as a global plan. You had a Western policy, you had an Eastern policy, you had a Northern policy, you had a Southern policy, but no one was using the word globalization before 1989 because there was a wall in the way. So the fall of the wall was hugely important perceptually for how people could think of the world as a single seamless space. Now I actually call this flattener when the walls came down and the windows came up. Because the Windows operating system 3.0, the breakthrough system, shipped 5 months after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So these two things happened at the same time. The wall came down and the windows came up. We suddenly had a single graphical user interface with universal application. So that was the first flattener. The second flattener, which I consider to be one of the most important days in our lifetime and in the lifetime of this planet, of equal importance to 11/9, is 8/9/95, August 9th, 1995. August 9th, 1995 is the day a small startup company in Mountain View, California, called Netscape went public. And Netscape going public was a huge flattener. For three reasons. The first reason is Netscape really gave us the internet. Yes, the internet, of course, it was there, it was being used by scientists. But thanks to Marc Andreessen's remarkable invention of the internet browser, which allowed us to actually illustrate on computer screens all the data, words, music, and information locked away in websites, it was the internet browser invented by Netscape which brought the internet alive. So that was the first important flattening effect of Netscape. Second thing Netscape did, a little more technical, was Netscape actually commercialized a set of open transmission protocols for the internet, so no company could dominate the internet. And that helped make the internet so much more interconnected. You'll recall when you first got email, your wife was on CompuServe and you were on AOL. It was really hard to communicate. Thanks to Netscape, all those walls got blown down and never came back. The third and most important thing, of course, Netscape did was trigger the dot-com boom, which triggered the dot-com bubble, which triggered the accidental overinvestment of $1 trillion in fiber optic cable in 5 years. And that crazy, wild, ridiculous, absurd overinvestment in fiber optic cable, undersea and overland, accidentally made Bangalore and New Haven and Bethesda next-door neighbors without anyone realizing what had happened. It so drove down the cost of transmitting voice and words and data over fiber optic lines that it basically made it free. And that had a huge leveling effect. Netscape went public on 8/9/95. Stock was priced that day at $28. It opened at 71. It closed the first day at 56. Everyone looked at that and said, there is gold over them there hills. And every Yahoo, from Global Crossing to Lucent to fly-by-night.telecom, said, we are going to lay fiber optic cable because the demand is going to be infinite. And they all tried to do it at the same time. And the accidental effect was to drive down the cost of telecommunications globally to virtually zero. Now, we went through a boom like this in our own country, you recall, a century ago with the railroads. There was a similar bubble and a similar overinvestment. There's one difference. When we built the railroads, we got to ride for free. When we laid the global telecom network, India and China got to ride for free. And this was a huge flattener. So in sum, what the Netscape moment did was bring people-to-people connectivity to a whole new level. Suddenly, more people could connect with more people more cheaply from more different places than ever before. The third flattener is something I simply call workflow. And workflow is my name for all that software and all the standards that connected all that bandwidth with all those PCs. And workflow is everything from Microsoft Word to Microsoft NetMeeting to proprietary software that any of you have, to run your businesses or schools. Now again, you'll go back just to the mid-1990s. In the mid-1990s, Yale's admissions department was running Microsoft. The accounting department, though, was running Novell. Each department was much more efficient because they had computers and email. There was just one problem. The admissions department couldn't communicate with the accounting department because applications did not connect to applications. Well, there was a quiet revolution during the late 1990s that basically enabled everyone's application to connect with everyone else's application, no matter what software you were running and no matter what computer you were running it on. So you suddenly woke up one day and discovered you could do e-banking, and your bank didn't care what software you had, what computer you had, and you didn't care what computer the bank had or what software they were running. Friends, that was a revolution, because suddenly everyone's applications could connect with everyone else's applications, which meant suddenly people could work together in manifold new ways. So now we come to the genesis moment of the flat world. When you take the Netscape moment, you bring people together like never before, and then you take the workflow moment and enable people to connect applications with applications like never before. What we created, willy-nilly, at the end of the 1990s was a global platform for multiple forms of collaboration. Suddenly more people could collaborate on more different things from more different places than ever before off this platform. Now, the next 6 flatteners, I argue, are the 6 new forms of collaboration that sprung from this platform and flattened the world even more. The first is outsourcing, whole new form of collaboration. Now Yale, if it wants, can take its accounting department and move it to North Dakota, to Mexico City, or to Bangalore. Either one is equally easy on this platform. Outsourcing, new form of collaboration. Second new form of collaboration is offshoring. I build each one of these around a date, so I build the outsourcing around Y2K. I build the next one, offshoring, around China joining the World Trade Organization. Now I take my whole factory and move it from Canton, Ohio to Canton, China, and integrate it into my production chain. Offshoring, whole new form of collaboration. Third new form of collaboration is open sourcing. Bunch of geeks sitting at home, maybe some people in this room, working online for free, writing the next operating system, Linux. Open sourcing, whole new form of collaboration. I mean, how would you like to be Bill Gates? Well, how would you like to be Bill Gates, actually? Your whole business model all these years is that any company rises up to challenge you, you underprice them, you undercut them. One day you wake up and you discover that Linux has 15% of the world operating system market. And it's sold for free. It's hard to beat free. It's hard to undercut free. Now, what is this open sourcing about? Well, some of it's driven by people, a lot of it's driven by people who hate Microsoft, okay? And a lot of it is driven by scientists who love the pure science of it and the peer review. Look at this algorithm I came up with. Look at this patch I came up with. And that's a big part of the open source movement. But it is becoming a whole new industrial model of production. In the book, I profile Brian Behlendorf, the young man from Berkeley who drove the Apache web server project. Yeah, all your computers run on Apache. That's the web server that goes from your computer and gets that thing out of your website. Every computer needs a web server in order to dish up websites. And Apache was a completely open source project that basically developed a web server so good that IBM eventually threw in the towel, junked its own commercial server, and sent its engineers to join this open source chat room. In fact, as I tell the story in the book, IBM at first, they said, bunch of silly college geeks, we'll give them the B team. That took about one day, and the Apache people sent the IBM people back home. So you send us the A team. Okay, what you're sending, this junk, we're not going to use this. So a lot of, I know they've got a big stage crowd here, but I guarantee you everyone under 22 here knows what Firefox is about, okay? Firefox is the hottest new web browser. It now has 5% of the global web browser market in 1 month. Firefox was produced in an open source collaboration between a 19-year-old at Stanford and a 24-year-old in New Zealand. I have no idea whether they've ever even met. In 1 month, the first month Firefox was put up, it was downloaded 10 million times, okay? And it's the hottest thing on college campuses today. So open sourcing, in my book, in writing this book, I use Wikipedia constantly, which is an open source encyclopedia, where people around the world send in entries. You know, somebody's written Ernesto Zedillo's biography there. Someone wrote in and corrected it. You know, maybe Mrs. Zedillo, you know, maybe Mr. Zedillo. Ernesto's son then wrote in and changed the spelling of his name and, you know, got that right. But this is a completely globally produced open source encyclopedia. And it's certainly replaced Encarta in my computer. So open sourcing, whole new form of collaboration. The fourth new form of collaboration I build around Walmart. And this I simply call supply chaining, where you design a global supply chain down to the last atom of efficiency, the likes of which we've never really seen before. So you take an item off the shelf at the Walmart in West Haven, and another exact replica of that item is immediately produced in Shenzhen, China. If Walmart were a country, today it would be China's 8th largest trading partner, ahead of Canada and Australia. So we're talking about a supply chain down to the last atom of efficiency, a whole new form of collaboration empowered by this world. The fifth new form of collaboration, this was the one that was the most interesting for me to discover and learn about. It was very interesting writing this book. If you go to the acknowledgments, you'll see that the first two people acknowledged my two primary tutors for this book were two Indian entrepreneurs, Nandan Nilekani of Infosys and his arch rival, Vivek Paul, the president of Wipro, which are the two leading Indian outsourcing firms in Bangalore. And which itself is kind of an interesting story. I interviewed one person in the Bush administration to write this book. And I live in Washington, D.C., okay? But the people who really broke the code for me were two Indian entrepreneurs who were really in the epicenter of this. Anyways, I was in Beijing, and I got an email last June from Nandan who said, I've got another flattener for you. You have to add UPS. So I really didn't know what he was talking about, but I got home and went down to UPS, and then I discovered exactly what he was talking about. So UPS is my fifth flattener, excuse me. It does something that I call in the book insourcing. And insourcing is I come right inside your company, right up to your neck, right up to your headquarters, and I take over your entire internal logistics. So say you have a Toshiba laptop, and it breaks one day. And so you go to the warranty, and it says, call 1-800-HELP. So you call 1-800-HELP, and it says, take your Toshiba laptop down to the UPS store. Send it to us, and we'll fix it, no problem. What you don't know is your Toshiba laptop goes from the UPS store to UPS's hub at Louisville Airport in Kentucky, where in an airline hangar at Louisville Airport, in a clean room, a UPS employee repairs your Toshiba laptop. It never touches the hands of Toshiba. You go to Nike.com, you want to get a new pair of sneakers for the kids. UPS answers the email. They're on the other side of the screen. They pick and pack the shoes. They ship them. They collect the money. See the Papa John's pizza truck go by? Guess who's driving? It's someone in funny brown shorts, okay? UPS today is inside, okay, hundreds and hundreds of companies who no longer ever touch their products anymore. They are simply marketing shells, and everything has been insourced to UPS. This is a whole new form of collaboration, which is going to become an incredible flattener, because the standards to make this work seamlessly have a huge flattening effect. That's the fifth. So now we have, let's say, we got outsourcing, offshoring, open sourcing, supply chaining, and insourcing. That's five. I said there were six. The sixth I simply call informing. And informing is a new form of collaboration that is really my name for Google, Yahoo, and Microsoft Search. Because I can now inform myself. I can collaborate with data and mine data all by myself. So that's really 9. We've got the first 3, they create the platform. We've got the next 6, they really are the new forms of collaboration that spring from this platform. The 10th, as I said, there were 10 flatteners, I simply call the steroids. And the steroids are wireless and voice over the internet. And what these steroids do is turbocharge, all 6 of these new forms of collaboration. So now I can do any one from anywhere with any device, totally mobily. Now, the next chapter of the book is really, in some ways, where I just tie all of this together. It's called the triple convergence. And the simple argument here, and I'll end with this chapter, is that sometime right around the year 2000, there was a triple convergence. 3 things converged. The first thing that converged were all 10 of these flatteners. Right around the year 2000, a tipping point was reached, and all 10 flatteners started to work together. The complementarities between them all started to reinforce each other. So the outsourcing was enabled by the informing helped the open sourcing drove the insourcing. The complementarities between all these flatteners started to work together. And that, friends, is what I argue, flattened the world. That is what flattened the world, because the product of that first convergence was a web-enabled global platform for multiple forms of sharing of work and knowledge, irrespective of distance, time, geography, and increasingly, even language. That is the moment when the world got flat. The second convergence, I said there were 3, is that we're now learning, we're just at the beginning of this, to horizontalize ourselves. We're all learning to interact with this new platform horizontally rather than vertically. That is, we're moving from a world where value is created in vertical silos of command and control to a world where value is increasingly being created in horizontal collaborations of connect and collaborate. Now, there's a very famous economics article by Paul David of Stanford who asked the question, when electricity first came out, electric motors, why didn't we get a boost in productivity? And his answer was because people had to actually redesign factories around small electric motors and away from big steam engines and pulleys, which required multi-story factories. So it was really only when architects changed their designs, managers changed their designs, and we all changed our habits, basically, that we got the most out of electrification. So what we're in the process of right now is what I call horizontalizing ourselves. We're learning, we're just at the beginning, how to collaborate differently around this platform. So, can you start it? Stay still, yeah. Now, the best illustration I can give you actually is a story that involves Yale, and this really will bring it alive to you. It did to me. As I said, my daughter is I can finally say, I've been giving this speech, a couple weeks now. Say my daughter goes to school in New Haven. My daughter's a student here, okay? So, and we live in Bethesda, Maryland. Now, I don't know how many of you are from Maryland, but if you are from Maryland, you know it's a complete pain in the butt to get here from Bethesda. You have to drive to BWI Airport in Baltimore, take Southwest Airlines from Baltimore to Hartford, and then drive an hour from Hartford to New Haven. So last spring, I was coming up to visit my daughter in March, and I was bringing a couple bags of spring clothes for her and whatnot. And I'm a big Southwest fan, and so and I don't know if I may have flown Southwest, but you may know that there's no reserved seats on Southwest. You just get a ticket that says A, B, or C. You do not want to be a C on Southwest Airlines, okay? Especially if you're taking a couple of bags of carry-ons, because there'll be no room in the bin above the seat. You don't even want to be a B where you'll be stuck in the middle. No problem. I'm a hip guy. I did the e-ticket thing. Called American Express and, got my e-ticket on Southwest. Well, I arrived at BWI Airport in Baltimore 95 minutes before my flight, because I was going to be an A because I had my stuff for my daughter. And stuck my credit card into the Southwest e-ticket machine, and out came that ticket, and it said B. I said, son of a... This thing is fixed. This is rigged. This is worse than Las Vegas. There is no way I'm a B. I'm here 95 minutes before this flight. There's no way I'm a B. Went and got my Cinnabon and sat in the back of the B line. Well, about 45... Could you stop? It's really distracting. Can you just stop? Thanks. Okay. Well, about 45 minutes later, they called the flight. And then I saw it. all the A's seemed to be getting on, carrying crumpled pieces of what looked like home printer paper, as if they had downloaded and printed out their boarding passes and barcodes at 12:01 a.m. the night before. Well, of course, what I didn't realize was that Southwest Airlines, thanks to this convergence, had just begun a program that says you can now download and print out your boarding pass at 12:01 a.m. the night before and just show up at the gate with your home printer paper. Oh, friends, I looked at that and I said, Friedman, you are so 20th century. You are so Globalization 2.0. Think about it. In Globalization 1.0, there was a ticket agent. When I moved to Washington to get a ticket, I used to have to go down to the United Airlines office, pull a number out of the machine, wait in line. There was a physical person in front of me. We did a transaction. I got my tickets. Then we got the e-ticket machine. We thought that was cool. While you were sleeping, Southwest Airlines made you the ticket agent. And they made you their employee. And excuse me, if you value your own time, staying up at 12:01 a.m. the night before, you are paying Southwest Airlines to be their employee. So all of that is a result of this convergence. But because I hadn't horizontalized myself, I hadn't changed my habits to collaborate with Southwest differently, I didn't get any of the productivity boost. Like a moron, I showed up at BWI Airport 95 minutes before the flight, wasting all that time, basically, when if I'd had horizontalized myself the night before, I could have gotten the productivity boost. We're just at the beginning of this phenomena, and it's happening in every single industry. But I said that's the second convergence. The third and last convergence is that this flattening happened to coincide with a huge event in the world. 3 billion people called Russia, China, and India walking onto the playing field. And when do they arrive on the playing field? Just when it's been flattened. Just when they and their kids can plug and play more directly than ever before in the history of the world. Yes, yes, I know maybe only 10% of those 3 billion can really plug and play. See, 10% of 3 billion, one carry the zero. That's 300 million. That's twice the size of the American workforce. So the simple thesis of this book is that it is the convergence of these 10 technologies and events with these new business processes, with these 3 billion new players, that is really going to define and shape the brief history of the 21st century. Now, before I finish, let me simply point out that this flattening, this triple convergence of these technologies, habits, and people coincided with a political perfect storm. And the political perfect storm was called 9/11, Enron, and the dot-com bust. The dot-com bust made some very silly people write that globalization was over. Don't you think about that anymore. 9/11 completely distracted us as a country and an administration and as journalists. And of course, Enron made every CEO guilty until proven innocent, and therefore no one wanted to think about or talk to them. So it was a really interesting experience researching this book, because everything I told you, I didn't know a year ago. And I really learned from going around interviewing people, technologists, who were in the middle of it. But these CEOs who were doing it, they were like, it was like being in a science fiction movie. They're like pod people, okay? They know the secret, okay? They know just what's happening, and they're doing it like crazy. But nobody's told the kids. Nobody's told the kids. So right at a moment when we have reached an incredible inflection point, we're moving from a world of vertical to horizontal, nobody's talking about it. We have a president who's trying to unravel the New Deal at a time when what we really need is a new Deal to deal with a world gone flat. So we just had an election where the Democrats were debating whether NAFTA was a good idea. And the Republicans put duct tape over the mouth of chief White House economist Greg Mankiw when he said outsourcing made a lot of sense, and stashed him in Dick Cheney's basement. So right when we've reached this really defining, transforming moment of the beginning of the flattening process, nobody's talking about it. The debate about globalization is so out of date. I mean, with all due respect to the nation, but, these magazines are dining out on the carcass of a debate from about 1996 about IMF conditionality and World Bank condition. I just met with an Indian finance official who said the IMF's begging us to borrow money now. We don't even think about the IMF anymore. And so the whole debate about globalization hasn't even begun to catch up with what's actually been happening in the world. So let me simply end by saying, I wrote this book to tell the kids, at least tell my own kids, what I think is happening in the world. And what I think is happening was best described by Carly Fiorina, the former CEO of HP, who said, everything we called the IT revolution these last 20 years, sorry to tell you, just the warm-up act. That was just the sharpening, forging, and distribution of the tools of collaboration. We're now just at the end of the beginning. What you now are about to see is the real IT revolution with what's happened here. So, ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts, put your seat backs and tray tables into a fixed and upright position, because the world is flat. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Tom has agreed to take a few questions. Let me use my privilege as host and go back to an old argument that Tom and I had for many years. I believe everything that Tom says in this book, but I would like to argue that all of this, which I think it's a wonderful word, I think prosperity and even peace and security could stem very powerfully from this kind of globalization. But the other side of the story for me is that all of this can be at risk. And Tom, being, as he calls himself, I think in page 374, he says, I am a technological determinist, guilty as charged. You said it here. Well, I'm not a technological determinist. I think that indeed globalization has been driven to a great extent by technological advances, but also by political decisions. And political decisions to open up economies, to allow investment, to do many things through those political decisions. And sometimes they are good, but other times they can be stupid. And aren't we risking all of this, Tom, by stupid political decisions that could stop the process? Or are you still a diehard
374?
374.
I just got to find that, yes. I just have to read the next sentence. The chapter is called The Unflat World. So let me try to answer it. I am a technological determinist, guilty as charged. But while I am a technological determinist, I am not a historical determinist. There is absolutely no guarantee that everyone will use these new technologies or the triple convergence for the benefit of themselves, their countries, or humanity. These are just technologies. Using them does not make you modern, smart, moral, wise, fair, or decent. It just makes you able to communicate, compete, and collaborate farther and faster. In the absence of a world destabilizing war, every one of these technologies will become cheaper, lighter, smaller, and more personal, mobile, digital, and virtual. Therefore, more and more people will find more and more ways to use them. We can only hope that more people in more places will use them to create, collaborate, and grow their living standards, not the opposite. But it doesn't have to happen. To put it another way, I don't know how the flattening of the world will come out. Indeed, this is the point in the book where I have to make a confession. I know the world is not flat. But I have to tell you, in fairness to Ernesto and his question, that chapter was very much stimulated by not only Ernesto's questions, but when you read the book, you'll see his input. Because we have had this conversation for a long time. And Ernesto knows from personal experience, as someone who had to try to manage NAFTA, how politically explosive the backlash can be. And especially when the world goes flat and we now have a whole new group of people who could be affected, not just blue-collar workers, but white-collar workers and knowledge workers who also vote and write op-ed pieces for the New York Times. And that's why I think, and I quote Ernesto in the book as making the point which he just provocatively made here, as saying there's, you know, the chapter that this is all in is called No Guns or Cell Phones Allowed. And it's a sign from a health club in Minneapolis, where I grew up. Because Minnesota passed a law a couple of years ago saying that you could bring a handgun or a weapon into a public place unless they explicitly had a sign on the door that said no guns allowed. And then health clubs discovered that people were bringing cameras into locker rooms and unfortunately taking pictures of people with their clothes off and then emailing them around the world. So they really just put the two together there, one after the other, no guns or cell phones allowed. And I really use that in my head to simply say, yeah, I'm a technological determinist. If people have the technologies, they will use them. But what they will use them for is not predetermined. And that's why I think it's so important. That's why I agree with Ernesto that we have to tell the kids. And we don't have to tell the kids, and the way to say this is not, there's something, it's not the Lou Dobbs way, okay? Something terrible, a terrible tragedy is we have to educate people. And we have to create what I call the New Deal that will make more people employable here and abroad when the world goes flat. And I actually lay my own philosophy out in the book, which I call compassionate flatism. I go through the different things we need, and of course the first thing I argue is a new kind of leadership. A new kind of leadership that doesn't use what's going on in the world to frighten us, to make us stupid, but to try to educate us on what's going on out there, where are the incredible opportunities. You know, we're connecting all the knowledge pools in the world together. That's one meaning of the flat world. When Bangalore is connected to Yale, when Fudan University, I've been on President Levin's International Advisory Board, and this morning all we heard are about the incredible collaborations Yale is now doing with Fudan University on genetics, and empowered and enabled entirely by a flat world. So we're connecting all the knowledge pools in the world together. That's really exciting. The next great breakthrough in bioscience could come from a 15-year-old in Mexico City who downloads the human genome. But the frightening thing about this, or the challenging thing about it, is that you do have to constantly be upgrading your knowledge skills in order to get a share in this world. And that's true whether you're in India or in Mexico or in New Haven. It's also true if you're a journalist. I just spent the last year retooling myself. I mean, I spent the last year in Bentonville, Arkansas with Walmart, in Louisville, Kentucky with UPS, in Bangalore with Wipro and Infosys. All I've been doing the last year is really just completely retooling myself out of sheer panic. Because if I didn't upgrade sort of my own knowledge skills, I wouldn't be able to write a column that would be able to make sense of the world. And so I have great sympathy with anyone else who has to do this. And I have a lot easier time doing it because I can manage my own time. It's not like I'm working for someone who can limit my time. But the main argument here, and in response to Ernesto's point, this to me is the discussion we should be having in the country right now. Not about privatizing Social Security, That's a complete ideological jag, okay? We need to be talking about the world as it really is, what are the challenges it poses, and what are the incredible opportunities it holds out. That's what we should be talking about right now. And that's, one of the debates I hope to trigger with the book. Ernesto. Yeah, we'll just go ahead. Yeah, I'm going to favor students, if that's okay. I hope you're a student. Can I see your ID, please? Sorry.
I'd like to ask for a few more details on your New Deal. You mentioned Walmart and NAFTA, and the thing comes to my mind is these unions. Unions during the last campaign were anti-globalization in America. So what's the prescription for unions? And if unions are in the future, how can workers push back against corporations and pursue justice?
No, it's a really important question. I don't frame it in terms of union, non-union. But the kind of priorities I lay out in this, in my own sort of compassionate flat, first I have a whole section on leadership, in which I simply say we have to have leaders who are educators, who tell us, who describe the world to us as it really is, okay? And that we all know, and I don't have to belabor that, what kind of political discussion we're having in this country. And just the level of it, how disconnected it really is from the world around us. Then I kind of break it down into what I call muscles and fat, okay? There's new muscles we have to acquire. And to me, I believe we should have national health care personally. But until we get that, one thing we absolutely must have is fully portable health care. So no one should be trapped in a job for a dying company. And I feel sorry for anyone working for General Motors right now or whatever, that people have got to be able to be as mobile and flexible with their health care. We have to have fully portable health care. 2, we have to have fully portable pensions. So I can pay in at this company and then take it and move to the next company, okay? So I can take advantage of growth where it is. That's what I think of in terms of partly in terms of muscles. The third thing I believe we need is wage insurance. For about $7 billion a year, and this really is chump change in the budget, we could have a program. Bob Lighton and Lori Kletzer from Berkeley have designed a whole program for wage insurance that doesn't fully compensate you if you lose your job to outsourcing or to foreign trade, but does give you a far bigger cushion than you'd have now. Not only gives you a cushion, but actually encourages you to take a new job and you actually still get, $10,000 over a certain period of time or $10,000 over a couple of years, depending on the situation you're in. That encourages you to take a new job quickly, which is actually the best way to get new skills. The fourth thing I think we need is tertiary education, post-secondary education. I believe that it was the high school movement that got us, 150 years ago, 98% of Americans worked in agriculture. Today, 2% work in agriculture. How did we get all those people from one to the other, from the agricultural world to the mechanical world, industrial world? We did it by making everyone go to high school. I believe now we have to enable everyone to have post-secondary education. That if we're thinking how we should be spending our money, it should be to create either a subsidy, tax break, or whatever, that any American who wants post-secondary education can get it. And then I go through a whole section about what companies can be doing to reskill people in order, because we have a new social compact now. It's no longer lifetime employment. No one can guarantee you that. But that I believe the new social contract between government and individual and company and individual should be lifetime employability. That by gosh, while you're here, I'm going to guarantee you the educational opportunities, either inside this company, which will make you more valuable to me if I can teach you a lot of different skills, or make you more valuable to somebody else outside here through lifetime learning possibilities. And the last thing I call for is new parenting. We're now blending in. The world's gone flat, and we're now meeting up with two cultures in particular, Chinese and Indian culture, that have a huge value on education. And, there's no getting around this. Mom, Dad, throw away the Game Boy. Shut off the TV. As I've said ad nauseum, when I was growing up, my parents used to say to me, Tom, finish your dinner. People in China and India are starving. And I say to my girls, finish your homework. People in China and India are starving for your jobs. Okay? So there's one entitlement we do really need to get rid of. And that is our sense of entitlement. Because in a flat world, there ain't no such thing as an American job. There's just no such thing. But the good news is no such thing as an Indian job or a Mexican job either. I mean, it's going to be there, but you're going to have to globalize yourself. You're going to have to think of yourself as competing against and with a much wider workforce. So those are the kind of things, and I don't pretend they're comprehensive, but I'm trying to kick off a discussion. And I don't know where unions fit into that or not, but that we at least talk about the world as it is and what are some of the tools we need to prepare our people for that world. So that's where I come from. Yeah. No, behind you, him. I want to get the student if I could. I'll come back to the old guys.
It seems that countries with large educational infrastructures like China, India, and the United States and Western Europe are well prepared to take a part in Globalization 3.0. But what should we do to help parts of the world that don't have that infrastructure, especially sub-Saharan Africa?
Yeah. To be up, to get up there. I don't want to pretend like I have a magic cure for kind of every problem that I've raised. I have, and there's, I'm sure, huge gaps in this book. But to me, a lot of it is about, well, first of all, explain to people the world they're in. And the world we're in is that the countries that will succeed are those that have the best infrastructure, with the best education system, with the most investment-friendly environment, with the most stable government. So there's no rocket science to this. And whether it's, again, Mexico, America, or Upper Volta, or it's not Upper Volta anymore, whatever it is, it applies to everybody. And so, one of the things examples I give, because I use, to me, the key word in all this is collaboration. We're moving to this world where it's all about how we collaborate. And so I give the example of different ways of collaborating with different parts of the world that are caught up in this. So this chapter, The Unflat World, identifies 4 sort of communities that are really out of it. One I call the too sick, okay? And that's communities and countries caught up in HIV, AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis. These people are too sick to collaborate and plug and play on this platform. Second are the too unable. That's rural India, rural China, rural Mexico. They're kind of half flat in the sense they've been to Mexico City, they've been to Bangalore, they've seen the big cars and the riches and the big, they'd like to be part of it, but they don't have the tools, okay? And so the third group I call the too frustrated, and that's really the Arab world today. Because when the world goes flat, you get your humiliation fiber optically, okay? You get it at 56K, right in the face. Because in a flat world, you can see just where the caravan is and just how far behind you are. And that produces enormous and dangerous resentments. And the fourth is too many Toyotas. Because when 3 billion people walk onto the flat world and they all have their own version of an American dream, a house, a car, a toaster, and a microwave, if we don't find an alternative source of energy, we're either going to burn up this planet or we're going to be in a war with China over oil. Because if you haven't noticed, I mean, China's foreign policy today is very simple. It's called Taiwan and looking for oil. That's it. Okay, so, back really to your question. In the too sick part, I actually talk about the Gates Foundation and what they have done, looking for innovative ways to collaborate with people in the too sick communities. In the too unabled, here I really lay down a challenge to the anti-globalization movement, because I believe what the anti-globalization movement should be about today. All that energy, and there was enormous energy there, moral energy, okay? But I believe it was really squandered it may have had a moment before, but it's completely irrelevant now. And, dressing up like a turtle and throwing a stone through McDonald's window isn't going to feed, one person in the world today. But I don't want that energy to go away. I think where the anti-globalization, where the left should be on this issue, is understanding, poor people don't resent rich people anywhere nearly as much as the left sometimes think. What they resent is not having the chance to get rich. And you take a look at India today. Here's a country that in 1991, before it adopted a globalization strategy, had $100 million in the bank. Today it has $118 billion in foreign reserves. That's great news, but here's the problem. Now when they budget 1 million rupees from New Delhi to that school just south of Bangalore, by the time it arrives at that school, it's 50,000 rupees, okay? And I believe where the anti-globalization movement should be is focused entirely on local governance. transparency, accountability, using the internet, using all the tools we have to trace every dollar that comes out of Mexico City and where it ends up in the countryside, and every dollar that leaves New Delhi and where it gets to the village. My own personal feeling is poverty is a governance issue. Overpopulation is a governance issue. Environmental degradation is a governance issue. You know, that unless you get governance that works, you're really not going to be able to tackle any of these problems. So that's where I think, to the extent that we, in the developed, flat world, think about how we can help, it's really there. The other example I give in that chapter is HP did a very interesting project. They did a pilot project in a village in India. It's in the book. I don't remember the name. Where it always starts with listening. The best collaborators are listeners. So HP sent a team out to this village, and they simply lived there and said, what do people need? Okay? And the answer they came up with after about 2 months was that these people really need someone to take pictures. They have all kinds of need for pictures, for licenses and whatnot. And to get a picture, they have to walk an hour to the next town. So HP said, no problem. Pictures is us. We do pictures. We just send them a bunch of cameras and developer machines. Great, no problem. No electricity. Okay. So the HP sent their engineers out and sort of scratched their head. Well, we can do this. So they created mobile photo labs using solar panels. Okay. Designed the whole thing. Came just out of listening to the problems here. And then they went to a women's NGO and said, we're going to rent this to you, because they really wanted to see what people would do with it. And so they rented it to this women's group, and they went out. They rented 2 of them. They built 2, and they rented them. And they went out and started using it. Well, it turns out Indian villagers, just like New Haven residents, love to have family pictures. And they want their weddings and their family celebrations. And so suddenly these women started making a wonderful little business, not just taking pictures for farmers who needed licenses, but grandma and grandpa and birthdays and weddings and bar mitzvahs and whatever else, So this worked great, and they were thrilled. They were making money from it. So 6 months went by, and I tell the whole story in the book. I don't remember how much time. And HP came to the women's group and said, this is great. This is so neat what you have done with it. Now we want our camera back. They said, what? What do you mean you want your camera back? We got a nice little business. And HP said, and they knew what they were doing. They said, we're not an NGO. We're HP. Okay? We're looking to make this a sustainable business model. So here's the deal. You find a way to pay us X amount each month, and you can keep the cameras. And that's what they did. So they set up a payment system where they rent them, and they pay them, I think it's $9 a month or whatever it is, and then they buy the paper and stuff. So from HP's point of view, like if this takes off, that's a huge market, That's what you want. They don't want charity, okay? The people don't want charity, and HP is not a charity. So that's not sustainable. So it's looking for ways to collaborate with people in really creative ways that start by listening to them first, and then working the technology back. So, yeah.
So it seems to me that people are built with a need for relationship, and that all of our ethics that people are based on. And as we globalize out, we're talking about relationships that are happening overseas on computer screens. You never really have that human relationship.
Right.
So I'm wondering what you think the effects
On human beings, on...
beings will be from this, and do you think we can catch up?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Did you hear that? She wants to know if there'll be a book signing afterwards, and there will be. Thank you. I'll be signing books afterwards, and they're all out there, and I'll be very happy. Thank you so much for your question. No, the question was really, we all crave human interaction, and what happens when we're interacting, but with more people, but really virtually, is really the question. And I'm not going to dodge it. I just have to say, I think that's a really good question, and I don't know. I think that we're really at the beginning of something. And I say that many times in the book. I don't know where this goes. I think the job of the analyst is to try to see something and define it right when it's reached a tipping point, but other people haven't seen it yet, and that's what I've tried to do here. But I really say many times in the book, I don't know where this is going. And I think that's one of them, one of the areas. All I can say to you, though, is like, in doing the book, I realized I was both writing about and interacting with this platform. I mean, it was so neat, like, so many people, like Rajesh Rao, who's a young Indian game designer in Bangalore, who today owns the global rights to Charlie Chaplin's image for cell phone games. This is a 32-year-old kid in Bangalore, okay, who started from nowhere. And read his section in the book. It'll knock your socks off, you know. But he and I, God, we'd be exchanging email at 2 in the morning, and it may not have been face-to-face, but wow, we were sure connected like never before. And I've had so many experiences like that in writing the book that I don't feel really impoverished, you know, by this. But I might. I just don't know. I think you're asking something very important. It's too early for me to tell, really. Yeah.
So I'm wondering if you talked to Michael Porter about this, because, you know, a lot of what he focuses on is clusters, and, you know, regardless of technology, which we've had in the U.S. for many years,
Right.
New York City is still ground zero, not part of
Right. Sure.
financial services.
Right.
So then given that sort of as a backdrop, do you think the U.S. its comparative advantage?
What will we keep? Yeah.
Well,
It's a really important question. And again, I don't know, because I think, we're too early, you know, in this. But, you know, my kind of general model is this. I think what happens in simple economics terms when the world goes flat like this is the global market gets much bigger. Suddenly it encompasses many more people. So that's really good if you sell the kind of services or software or idea goods that can be actually sold to everyone in the market at the same time. So if you sell Microsoft Windows. So the market gets bigger. And at the same time, the good news is it also gets more complex. And so, because people often say, my God, what's going to happen to my job? And I said, I have a chapter in the book, is free trade still should I believe in free trade? Is that good for my kid? I actually described the scene at Infosys at the shift change in Bangalore with, you know, thousands of young engineers going and thousands coming. Everyone looks like they got 1,600 on their SATs, you know. And I'm just sitting there watching this sea of people coming and going. And then the Infosys spokeswoman sidles up to me and says, we had 1 million applications last year for 9,000 jobs. Have a nice day. Okay. So you think, wow, Jesus, this is good. You know, I mean, but that would only be bad if you believed in the kind of lump of labor theory, that there was one lump of labor in the world. We've had it. And now India and China are going to grab it, you know. But that's actually not what happens. And what really happens is, I know there's some parents here, and so mom, dad, don't be surprised if your son or daughter comes home at the end of this year and says, Mom, Dad, I've thought about it. I really want to be a search engine optimizer when I grow up. You say, what in the world? Couldn't you be a doctor or a lawyer? You have to be what is that? Well, you know, 10 years ago, there was no such thing as Google. Today, Google is hiring mathematicians by the bushel, okay? Because they invented something called search, a whole new industry. Well, then somebody came along and said, now, if I type in the word suitcase into Google and press, I'm feeling lucky, and Samsonite comes up before Tom Friedman Suitcase Company, the benefits to Samsonite are monster benefits that people see Samsonite before they see mine. So this has now spawned a whole new industry called search engine optimizing, where I will work with you to get Tom Friedman Suitcase Company up above Samsonite. Well, this Google, you know, is just math. It's just an algorithm. So this combines math and marketing. It's a whole new industry. So this is going on every day. The challenge, I think, for us, in terms of the question, the worst thing I think is going to happen to any Yaley who gets a good education and anyone who graduates from the University of Minnesota is you're going to have to move horizontally. That is, some specialty we had may go somewhere else and we'll develop new niches and new specialties. If you don't have that education, you've got to move vertically. And society's job is to enable more people to move vertically. That's really the challenge for us. But remember, you know, after World War II, we stood astride the world, you know, totally dominant. And we did the craziest thing in the world. We rebuilt Europe into a competitor. And what happened? Our standard of living grew 6 straight decades. So I think the same will happen, you know, to India and China. But this is a little bit of a crisis, and we've got to meet it. I think we're best in a crisis. But as my friend Paul Romer says, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And we don't want to waste this crisis. Thank you very much.